Imagine being 17 years old in 1952. You remember pretty much most of World War II. Imagine being on an airplane in Finland and crossing an ocean to compete in a contest that never even existed before. There were no former winners, no traditions, no blueprints for how this is going to go. But then imagine hearing your name announced and realizing that from that moment forward, you would forever be known as the very first Miss Universe in history. Most stories like this end with, the woman walking away with the crown. But this story just begins there because the greatest surprise in Armi Kuusela's life was not winning the title. It was what she chose to do after she had the whole world's attention. All eyes were on her. So today, we follow a young woman who became an international sensation, but walked away from fame, traveled the world, spoke 7 languages, and somehow built a life even more remarkable than the fairy tale that made her famous. When people think about history, they often imagine wars and revolutions and disasters and scandals and assassinations and that sort of stuff, and moments where entire nations seem to hold their breath. But sometimes history certainly looks that way. Sometimes it arrives in smoke, sometimes in gunfire, sometimes with speeches, and sometimes with grief. But every now and then, history arrives with a crown. After yesterday's episode, doing such a deep dive into such a nasty, awful human being, if you haven't watched that episode on France, I don't blame you, but definitely check it out if you have the stomach for the history of some of the worst offenders in World War II on the Axis side. Anyway, on June 29th of 1952, thousands of people gathered in Long Beach, California to witness something that was completely and entirely new. They had never been a Miss Universe pageant before. No one could point to a previous winner. No one could compare contestants to legends from the past. There was no past. There was only possibility. And among the young women standing beneath the lights that evening was a 17-year-old young lady from Finland named Armi Kuusela. She did not know it then, and nobody did really, but it was about to be she was about to become the very first Miss Universe in all of history. And that fact alone would have guaranteed her a place in some record books and some notoriety at the time, sure. But yet what makes her story remarkable is not that she won. It was what she did afterward. And to understand that, we have to begin far away from California. We have to begin in her home of Finland. Armi Helena Kuusela was born in 1934, so she grew up in the country that had endured all of this hardship and uncertainty and World War II. Her family was not wealthy. They operated a very small business. She was one of 6 children during World War II. Like many young people of her generation, she grew up in a world that had experienced enormous upheaval. The glamorous life awaiting for her in California would have seemed really impossibly distant. If someone had told the young Armi that she would someday be recognized around the globe, she would have probably laughed and continued with whatever she was doing, like digging up worms or climbing trees. But life often prefers surprising people. And it was a surprise that set everything into motion. A notice appeared seeking contestants from Finland's national beauty competition. Armi herself was not the person who responded to this advertisement looking for people. Instead, the mother of her boarding school roommate saw the announcement and encouraged her participation. And I did mention that her family didn't have a lot of money, so don't think of this boarding school as being one of those upper crust high-end, high society boarding schools. This was one of those boarding schools that was quite normal for families and for people of Finland at the time. But this is one of those tiny moments that historians like me absolutely adore. Here's this young woman who has no clue what's around the corner. It was just a casual suggestion, a simple recommendation, and one single decision made by somebody she barely knew. And suddenly an entirely different future just opens up in front of her. Armi entered the competition. And her name was Armi, A-R-M-I, not Armi, A-R-M-Y. There is a distinction. Armi is a feminine name in Finland. So Armi went to this competition in Long Beach, California, and she won. And just like that, she became Finland's representative for the first Miss Universe pageant. Today, that title carries enormous recognition. In 1952, this was just so kind of a mystery. Nobody knew what Miss Universe was, or definitely what it would become. Nobody knew whether it would even survive. Nobody knew whether people would remember it even a year later. Yet there was excitement surrounding this event. The world was rebuilding. People were eager for some kind of optimism, especially over there. They were eager for some kind of celebration. They were eager for stories that did not involve battlefields and gunning down of enemies. So Armi and her older sister boarded a Pan American flight and headed toward California. You got to imagine that journey had to be exciting. She was a teenager, leaving her home nation of Finland. She had probably never left before. She was crossing an entire ocean and heading toward an event that would be watched around the world on home televisions. This was fairly new too. This was so glamorous. It was probably also really terrifying for a young girl. People sometimes forget that courage can look really kind of ordinary, but sometimes courage is simply getting onto an airplane and going somewhere new. So the contestants gathered in Long Beach. There were 30 competitors. When there's over 100 nations around the world, this doesn't seem huge, but each represented a different place, a different culture, a different dream. Photographers, of course, snapped a ton of photos, and I do have quite a few of those in the credits. I hope you enjoy those. Reporters took notes on these girls, and judges watched them very carefully. And somewhere beneath all of that excitement was a simple question: who would become the very first Miss Universe? When the answer finally came, it was Armi Kuusela. She was only 17 years old, 5 feet, 5 inches tall, 108 pounds. She was tiny. And suddenly, one of the most recognizable young women on the face of the earth. The crowd applauded, of course, and flashbulbs exploded, and newspapers rushed to publish her story. A crown was placed upon her head, but not just any crown. It wasn't like one of these kind of crowns that I wore to my wedding. I used this as a prop a couple of days ago. I actually did have this for holding my veil in place at my own wedding. And it's cute, isn't it? It's very cute. Well, this isn't what her crown looked like. Armi remains the only Miss Universe ever crowned with the Romanov Imperial Nuptial Crown. This is a remarkable piece associated with the former Russian imperial family. This was a fitting image, but hers was real diamond and real gold and extravagance. Oh my gosh, definitely fitting. And there is an image of her in the crown in the credits too. A young woman from Finland standing beneath bright lights was wearing a crown connected to a completely vanished dynasty a half a world away. The crown was from the Russian family. And here she was in Long Beach wearing it. If this had happened in a novel, editors would definitely complain that it was just a little bit too perfect and maybe this was not believable. But reality occasionally ignores those kinds of details and just spirals off in its own little tangent. The rewards arrived quickly. Armi was given a brand new automobile and a movie contract, international attention and public appearances and endless interviews. The transformation to her entire life was immediate. One day she was a student from a not well-to-do family and one of 6 children. The next, she was a global celebrity. People often assume that fame solves problems, but if you know anything about history, history suggests completely otherwise. Fame creates maybe some opportunities, but also it creates expectations, and everyone suddenly wanted something from this 17-year-old young lady. A photograph, a smile, a speech, a moment, a piece of your time, come talk to me, come give me your attention, a piece of her life. And Armi handled it remarkably well for somebody of her age. But yet the most important chapter was still waiting, because while newspapers celebrated her victory, something unexpected was quietly approaching. It was love, not the dramatic sort that's usually invented by screenwriters, not the scandalous sort preferred by tabloids and trash rags, but genuine affection between 2 people. And it would change everything in her entire life yet again. During a world tour, Armi attended an international exposition in the Philippines. There she met a businessman by the name of Virgilio Hilario. The connection was pretty much immediate. When she traveled onward to Japan, this man followed. And while that detail alone sounds as though it escaped from a magical and romantic film, it actually did happen. He followed her because she invited him to, but he followed. The relationship developed very quickly. It was kind of a whirlwind romance. The world watched as the first Miss Universe had become a complete celebrity by then, and people expected her to continue living inside of this little bubble in this role where she was expected to be this same person for as long as humanly possible. But instead, she made a decision that stunned many observers, pretty much everyone. She chose to follow her own future instead. Shortly before her reign officially ended, Armi relinquished the Miss Universe crown. She walked away voluntarily. She quit. There wasn't a scandal. There were no controversies. She was not disgraced. There was no public collapse. She just decided that the life that she wanted mattered more than the title that she had won. So then she married Mr. Hilario in Tokyo, Japan. Think about how unusual that was. Most people spend years chasing fame and wanting nothing more than that. But Armi reached the summit and then just chose something else. Something maybe better. And there's a quiet confidence in that decision. A confidence that becomes more impressive with time. Many fairy tales end with a princess being made or somebody getting a crown, but her story used the crown as just chapter 1 of this remarkable story. The decades that followed proved it. Armi and her husband built a life together in the Philippines. Virgilio, I think is how you pronounce his name. He and Armi raised 5 children. They developed businesses and they created opportunities for others. And doing this, they built a future together. When Virgilio died unexpectedly in 1975, Armi faced another difficult turning point in her life. She'd been married for over 20 years. So she did what she could, and she adapted. Once again, she moved forward. She later married an American diplomat by the name of Albert Williams. I do have pictures of both of these men in the credits. So if you want to look for those in the credits, look down at the bottom. You'll see them lined up right along here. That marriage opened yet another chapter of her life. that included Spain and Turkey and the United States and many different countries and cultures and languages and experiences. And by the time many people retire, they can point to one extraordinary chapter of their lives that they absolutely know without a doubt was the most adventurous part of their lives. But Armi accumulated several. She eventually became fluent in 7 languages. I mean, fluent. She traveled extensively and participated in charitable organizations. She supported medical research. She contributed to educational causes. And she became known not just for her beauty, but for her actual service to humanity. And perhaps that's the most satisfying twist in this entire story. Beauty fades. Headlines fade. Crowns fade. Fame fades. But character tends to remain. There's something wonderfully human about this woman. As the years passed, many of the people who witnessed that first pageant disappeared into history. Yet Armi remained, a living connection between 1952, a witness to an era, a reminder that a person's life cannot be measured by a single photograph. And today, when people hear the words Miss Universe, they often imagine maybe one evening in California or the joke that pageants have seemed to become since then. But that's such a small idea. It's far too small. This pageant may have lasted one night, but the life that followed lasted decades and had an immeasurable impact on the lives around her. That's where the real story lives. And perhaps that's why her story feels refreshing. There are no great scandals, no criminal conspiracies, no tragic endings. Instead, there's something surprisingly rare. Here's a person who achieved this extraordinary success and then built an equally extraordinary life afterward that was absolutely filled with love and passion and commitment and service to humanity. Not because she held on to fame, but because she refused to let fame define her or her life. History happens in grand moments and in quiet ones alike. Sometimes it is found in, elections or inventions or in wars. And sometimes it appears when a 17-year-old girl steps onto a stage and discovers the most important choice she's ever going to make has nothing to do with winning. Before we go, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this one. If you were given worldwide fame at 17 years old, would you have held onto it as tightly as possible? Or would you have been willing to walk away in pursuit of a life that you felt like maybe you wanted? And if you enjoy stories like this, please make sure you follow the podcast. I'm available through Facebook and YouTube and pretty much everywhere podcasts are available. And I love reading your comments on Facebook and YouTube. I know one gets way more comments than the other. And if you get a chance, if you could review the podcast, leave a little review. I love those too. So thank you for watching. I hope this one was a little bit more lighthearted for you guys, and I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. This was a breather compared to yesterday's episode.